Gaelics in general, Brits, Irish, all of it, Welsh, they don't like us. For whatever reason in Satan's plan, we just don't fit in. There's a problem with the Scots, and then the Irish, and then the Welsh. CIA's own documents and Ford Foundation, you look these up. By the 20s, they said, we've studied the peoples of the world, and they said the Scots,
that's
so it was
right.
British intelligence running it, they said the Scots continually resist, and the spirit of the
we
Scots
always will.
Jumped into the Revolutionary War in 1776. The Scots were behind the Texas Revolution, which is true, but it was
Hebrides.
the Gaelics in general. The Romans had conquered everybody, but they couldn't conquer. They built Hadrian's Wall north of
It's
London.
my DNA test right
trying
here.
to keep the Welsh and then above them the Scots out. And they say in the literature, they go, in the anthropology, the sociology, they say, the Scots just won't be assimilated.
Recommend to people is How the Scots Invented the Modern World, the true story of how Western Europe's poorest nation created our world and everything in it. Being Scottish myself and Irish and German, this is Alex Jones talking about how the deep state fears the Scots. And I like this soundbite because I'm Scottish and I'm proud of my Scottish heritage. So let's watch a little bit of this. Praise to the Scots.
CIA's own documents and Ford Foundation, you look these up. By the 20s, they said, we've studied the peoples of the world, and they said the Scots,
that's
so it was
right.
British intelligence running it, they said the Scots continually resist, and the spirit of the Scots
always will. Jumped
into the Revolutionary War in 1776. The Scots were behind the Texas Revolution, which is true. And when they talk about killing Western civilization, they said the Scottish spirit has infested the West, and white people must be destroyed because the Scottish spirit
This is what they fear the most.
Possess them. You can look this up.
It's what they fear the most. Proud of my Scottish heritage.
But it was
Hebrides.
the Gaelics in general. The Romans had conquered everybody, but they couldn't conquer. They built Hadrian's Wall north of
It's my
London.
DNA test right
trying
here.
to keep the Welsh and then above them the Scots out. And they say in the literature, they go, in the anthropology, the sociology, they say the Scots just won't be assimilated. Now they're total leftists and have, because it was a creepy, not a frontal attack. Now they've cut the Scots'
we're going
balls
to bring
off.
it back, though.
And by the way, I'm proud of my Scottish heritage. I had 3 genetic tests done for medical reasons. And because you do the cheap ones, they're all fake. They just give you garbage. But I did my genetic testing. I know I was a little bit Scot. I didn't realize I was a lot more Scot than I thought. So I guess that kind of explains it. You know, Trump's half Scottish, but I guess he's gotten away from what he's supposed to do. But
a lot of people don't know the power of the Scots. You can't deny the power of the Scots. Okay, at the end of the day, I'm like 21% Scottish, as you can see here as on my ancestry test. And I got a lot of Irish blood. I got a lot of, I got a little bit of French, but I'm like 28% Scandinavian, got like 17% Swede, 11% Finland. But I'm mostly Scottish overall. Got some German, some Netherlands, a little bit of Dutch in there, right? And then we got some Southeastern England and Northwestern Europe. That's my DNA. But yep, they fear the Scots. And a interesting book read that I always recommend to people is How the Scots Invented the Modern World, the true story of how Western Europe's poorest nation created our world and everything in it. And this is actually a book that's been recommended by Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's lifetime business partner, but it's an excellent book. I read it myself. And it really tells you about how the United States kind of took a lot of our ways of doing things, our governing, our law enforcement, all of it stems from a lot of that history of the Scottish DNA and that Scottish heritage. And that's something that I'm very proud of. You know, being Scottish myself and Irish and German, having a lot of that DNA, it's just definitely, you feel it. You know, you feel that Americana blood. And I definitely have that history. We came here in the, early 1700s, or I think it was like the late 1700s, something around there, right at the beginning and the founding of this country. And so I have like deep roots to America. And all I know, we can never let America die. And the Scots and the Irish and the English, we need to unite. And that is the most important thing that you can see the Europeans and the Americans doing, is uniting and remembering where we all come from, which is nations of explorers and conquerors and settlers, but in a way that isn't like the Israelis, because we did it in a way that was building and innovating. We built communities and societies. And at the end of the day, I think it was far less brutal than what we're seeing, than what we saw when the Americans when the Old English, whatever you want to call it, when they fled the New World, or when they fled England to come to the New World. It wasn't quite the same thing. We had something beautiful about this conquest, that you could say. And I think it was an important message, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and everything that came with it. The Scots did invent much of the modern world, our government and the way things actually operate, our justice system and everything, law enforcement, all of it. And so it's a very powerful soundbite, and because it's true. And the CIA absolutely does fear the Scot, the blood of the Scottish, the Irish, the European.
They do notice over and over again, it's people with Scottish bloodlines that are the biggest problems for their agenda. That's right, guys. Look it up. It's very interesting, isn't it?
And they should fear us.
Very, very interesting. Gaelics in general, Brits, Irish, all of it, Welsh, they don't like us. For whatever reason, in Satan's plan, we just don't fit in. There's a problem with the Scots, and then the Irish, and then the Welsh. And notice they went where the power was, though genetically, that's where they run their whole operation. Hitler cried bombing London. He wrote this. He thought the British Isles were the real Aryans. He thought they were the very best. He said this. Oh, the Germans are great, but not as good as them. See? So Hitler's loving this, and these other groups are hating this. It's the obsession with Albion. That's the old Roman name for the British Isles. England and Scotland.
The Saxons.
And I'm just telling you what they're obsessed with. The globalists are obsessed. Use the Lord of the Rings analogy, he was a sociologist, anthropologist, historian, and linguist, J.R.R. Tolkien, and he said in speeches he gave and things, he said, the Rohan are the Scots. And so who finally smashes at the battles and finally
ding, ding, ding.
has the power to crush Mordor is the Rohan.
That's right.
There's this spiritual obsession. Or you could use the Riddick Chronicles analogy of the Furian energy, the whatever it is, the Scots, this energy fears it. Imagine if we could re-energize the Scots. By the way, a Scots coming on next hour. How thank you. I didn't even plan this today. I'm going to ask him. Nice, funny guys, real sweet, till they're not. What is it about the Scots that has the Satanists so scared?
Christ.
But
the Catholic
the entire
Church
of Albion has them scared. They hate the Irish. They hate real British. They hate Welsh.
So true.
What is it about them?
They don't assimilate.
What is it about them they don't like? Something we should study.
Well, the Brits have assimilated over time, but at the end of the day, that is very true. And I was named after Brendan Shanahan. But if you Google my name, Brendan, it means Prince, King. And it's a lot of my name was actually named a little bit after Saint Brendan the Navigator. And so there's multiple meanings to the beginning of my name and where it comes from, but more of an Irish name. But my middle name, Brendan Scott Ecker. And so proud of that Scottish DNA. We need to bring back that Scottish DNA again. We need to bring back that heritage. And ultimately that way of doing things in America, our government and, the actual Scots, the native Scots who are living in Scotland. I'm an American with Scottish DNA and some Irish DNA, a little bit of German DNA, Dutch DNA, Finnish and Swedish, a lot of that. But we need the natives of those countries to truly become empowered and remember who they are. The Vikings in Sweden and Finland and Norway, where they come from, that ethos of conquest, exploration, Ragnar the Lothbrok coming across the new world and navigating the oceans, figuring out compasses and building ships out of, crafting ships with their own hands. And then all these other countries and these, nations they dominate having no idea of how these things were even possible during those days in the BC era. So it's crazy to think about when you look at history, how things have really turned and changed and how easily just a couple generations can change an ethos of, an ancestry and an identity and a national heritage. Very scary stuff. Moving on from that,